Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President-elect Trump loses another bid to get his New York conviction tossed. One consolation, the judge says he won't send him to prison. But Trump has been ordered to appear for sentencing next week. The 119th Congress kicks off. Congressman Mike Johnson reelected as House Speaker in a dramatic first ballot. That's after flipping two GOP opponents. Luis Martinez standing by on Capitol Hill. The suspect in the Las Vegas Cybertruck explosion has been identified, and new details about his motives emerge. Plus, new information about the suspect in the New Orleans terror attack as the community begins to heal. Chris Spears reports. President Biden using his power to block a Japanese company from buying U.S. steel. Union workers approve the move while neither company does. Jason Blair at the White House. And a powerful winter storm threatens widespread ice and snow across the U.S. with dangerous travel conditions and plunging temperatures ahead. Christina Corona brings us a weather update.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A judge again rejects President-elect Trump's request to toss his conviction in the New York business records case. Judge Juan Merchan said in a written order today that he will not dismiss the New York criminal conviction against President-elect Trump. Sentencing is set for January 10th, less than 2 weeks before Trump will be sworn in for his second term. Merchan also said he won't send the 47th president to prison. Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in connection with a $130,000 payment to former adult film actress Stormy Daniels. For the sentencing, Trump has the option of appearing in person or virtually. The 119th Congress kicked off today with Republicans taking control of both chambers, and Republican Congressman Mike Johnson reelected as House Speaker in a dramatic floor vote. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez joins us live now from the Capitol. Luis, good evening. Tell us about what happened today.
Of course, Tiffany, let's start with the House of Representatives. So as you mentioned, the 119th Congress kicked off today. The first order of business in the House was the election of a new speaker for the next 2 years. The only nominee by the House Republican Conference was Speaker of the House, former Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. And on the first round of voting, he only received 216 votes. That means that 3 Republicans actually voted for a different option. That was Thomas Massie from Kentucky, who had already mentioned that he was not going to support Speaker Johnson. He voted for Whip Tom Emmer to be Speaker. And then we also had Congressman Ralph Norman and Keith Self, who voted for different candidates. And right before, Tiffany, right before voting ended, President-elect Donald Trump called the holdouts, Congressman Ralph Norman and Keith Self, spoke to them on speakerphone on the House floor, and convinced them to switch their vote right before the end of voting time. Let's listen to both Congressman Ralph Norman and Keith Self after the election of Speaker of the House.
Well, he's going to tackle what we know the Trump agenda is, and we've talked about that. I think it's the big, beautiful reconciliation package. So I think that'll be right up front as soon as we get started.
Is that what Trump is calling it, the big, beautiful reconciliation package?
Well, I haven't heard him say that, but I understand that, and I think that's a good way to put it.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, what did you get? I didn't get anything personally other than a commitment that things are going to change. Over the last 14 months, there's going to be a drastic change from the next 14 months. Let me go down here right quick.
So, Tiffany, before the end of voting, Congressman Ralph Norman and Keith Self changed their votes and got Speaker Mike Johnson to that 218 votes, a magic number to get elected. Now, this wasn't without concessions. The Freedom Caucus also sent a letter saying that they had supported Speaker Johnson today, having gotten his commitment to reduce government spending in the reconciliation bill that House and Senate Republicans will draft in the coming weeks. They're also going to reduce the Speaker's ability to put bills on the floor under suspension of the rules. And they also increase the margin needed to activate a motion to vacate the speakership. And the previous Congress, it was 3 congressmen that had to move to vacate the speakership. Now it's going to have to be 9. So a good outcome for Speaker Johnson, and we also saw the influence of President-elect Trump on the House Republican Conference, but we also understand that there are some divisions within that conference, and it'll be interesting to see how Speaker Johnson manages ahead.
Certainly an eventful day for House lawmakers, Luis, but what about in the Senate?
Well, in the Senate, Tiffany, also the senators were sworn in. Vice President Kamala Harris presided over that ceremony, and for the first time since 2006, the Senate Republican Conference has a new leader, and then also this 119th Congress has a new Senate Majority Leader. This is John Thune, who is replacing Mitch McConnell at the helm of the Senate Republican Conference, and now Chuck Schumer at the helm of the Senate Majority Leadership position. One of the interesting things, Tiffany, that we're expecting to hear from Senator John Thune in his new role as Senate Majority Leader is that he will, or is expected to vow to keep the filibuster in place. That means that for all legislation except the reconciliation bill, the Senate would need 3/4 of that upper chamber to pass any legislation. And we've also heard today from the majority of Senate Republicans urging their Democrat counterparts to have an expedited process, confirmation process of President-elect Donald Trump's national security nominees, in particular Peter Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, Kristi Noem for Department of Homeland Security, and Kash Patel for FBI Director. And this, of course, after the terrorist attack in New Orleans. Republicans want to see President-elect have his nominees take control of their departments as soon as possible. Back to you, Tiffany.
All right, Luis, thanks for those updates. How would Americans rate House Johnson's performance during the past year, and what would they like to see accomplished in the 119th Congress? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
How would you rate Speaker Johnson's performance thus far?
From 0 to 10, I would say about a 4.7. Everybody needs work, at the same time, but you got to see the perspective of what the people need.
I focused less on national politics and more on state politics.
I'd say like an 8 out of 10. Again, just kind of being in the middle, I think. I think sometimes he gets stuck in the middle of some big decisions that could go either way.
He's kind of forced to do a lot of things. They kind of use him to if you don't do this, then I'm gonna block that. And I feel like he should do something about that.
He did better than expected. But I think every effective speaker needs to be able to lead both sides. So I hope that he'll only get better at that.
I think he's a self-controlled man. He's level-headed. He's got a Christian attitude. Point is, he's got a good track record. Nobody's going to please everybody. So I think he's a good choice.
What would you like to see done under the 119th Congress coming up?
Well, I would like to see a lot more intentional working across the aisle. I would like to see the legislative body be distinctly separated from the other branches of government.
Immigration, the tariffs, it's going to be changing coming in January 9th.
I mean, I guess because I'm a student, I'd like to see something done about gun violence and pass some basic gun legislation.
Just keeping the majority of the Republicans voting the right way would be fine with me.
The border needs to be regulated. That'd be the first thing. Definitely some regulations on firearms, and then just overall, I think the biggest thing after that is the budget and getting regular American people's budget back under control.
Less partisan, more is just like we're Americans, like more patriotism kind of thing. It's pandemonium in there half the time, so they need to fix themselves so that way people will kind of like follow what they do.
Law enforcement confirms the identity of the suspect in the Las Vegas Cybertruck explosion. A family DNA match reveals a highly decorated Army soldier. Police say Matthew Levelsberger planned and carried out the incident. And we have new information about the suspect in the New Orleans terror attack while the city comes together to heal. NTD's Chris Beers has the story.
Law enforcement confirms Matthew Levelsberger is the man found in the exploded Tesla Cybertruck in Las Vegas. The FBI and the Las Vegas Sheriff's Office said DNA from a family member was matched with DNA from the badly burned body found in the truck. Authorities also reported on the active duty Army Green Beret's motive. Information found on Levelsberger's devices and interviews with people who knew him show he had no animosity toward President-elect Trump. 2 letters found in the investigation reveal he may have acted on both political and personal grievances. The letters are critical of U.S. leadership and say this was not a terrorist attack. In them, the highly decorated soldier addressed grief over taking lives in combat and losing fellow active duty soldiers to war. The AP reported that an Army nurse who dated the soldier says he had traumatic brain injury symptoms from a tour in Afghanistan. Authorities also say Levelsberger planned and carried out the explosion alone. Turning now to the New Orleans terror attack, the FBI has released new photos of the suspect. Shamsuddin Jabbar is reportedly shown walking around the Bourbon Street area planting improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, that were thankfully never detonated. One IED was placed in a camping cooler like the kind you can get at a Walmart. Multiple people walked by the cooler after it was rigged. Bourbon Street can get messy on a big party night like that, so a random water cooler wouldn't have stood out. The CEO of the rental car company Jabbar used to obtain the truck for the terror attack addressed the incident. Touro's Andre Haddad said the suspect raised no red flags after a background check the company conducted. Touro's rentals include luxury vehicles, so they run 50 data point checks on all their users. And as we approach 3 days since the incident, family members of the victims are speaking with the press. Here's the brother of the now deceased victim, Tiger Betch.
My sister's fiance kept calling me, and I didn't answer the first call, and he called me again, and I answered it. And he just told me that there had been a terrorist attack in New Orleans. There had been an attack in New Orleans because they didn't know what it was yet. And that my brother and his best friend were involved. That was my best friend, my role model. Looked up to him, inspired me to do, everything I've done in this life. Inspired my whole family. He was loved by so many people. He always made time for the little guy. He was special.
As Bourbon Street reopens to the public, the famed corridor is coming back to life. New Orleans is known for its rich musical heritage, and its well-known street performers are helping the community heal. Live street music can be heard there once again as the Cajun metropolis strives towards recovery. Chris Beers, NTD News.
And President Biden is expected to visit New Orleans to meet with the families and communities impacted in the attack on Monday. Also, Biden announced he's blocking the Japanese firm Nippon Steel from acquiring U.S. steel. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the latest from the White House.
President Biden says he's using his executive power to block a $14.3 billion acquisition of U.S. steel by Japan's Nippon Steel. He said in a statement, "A strong domestically owned and operated steel industry represents an essential national security priority and is critical for resilient supply chains." Biden first made his position known back in March of 2024. The White House press secretary also commented on the decision.
As foreign competitors like China distort global steel markets through unfair trade practices, such as dumping and overproduction, it is critical that we have a strong domestic steel industry that protects our national security and our supply chains.
President-elect Trump also had promised to block the deal when he takes office later this month. Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel released a joint statement against the move, saying they plan to take it to the courtroom. They say the president's statement and order do not present any credible evidence of a national security issue, making clear that this was a political decision. We are left with no choice but to take all appropriate action to protect our legal rights. U.S. shareholders also voted overwhelmingly to approve the takeover in April of 2024. The United States Steelworkers Union has maintained a strong opposition to the deal. They argue that Nippon Steel has not given sufficient guarantees that it would protect unionized jobs at some of the company's older mills. In response to Biden's announcement, the union says, "We have no doubt that it is the right move for our members and our national security." Reporting from the White House, Jason Blair, NTD News.
And to Southern California, where a small plane crashed through the roof of a warehouse. Police say 2 people died and at least 19 were injured in yesterday's crash.
The Fullerton Police Department and Fire Department received a radio call of a plane crash in the 2300 block of Raymer Avenue, where we're standing now. The plane crashed into a commercial building halfway down the block on the left side, south side of the street. Right now, the scene is stabilized. Fire department is still in charge of the scene. We're waiting for the federal authorities, NTSB, to arrive to continue to take over the investigation.
CCTV footage shows the moment of the crash, an explosion and a column of thick black smoke rising from where the plane hit. Police say the people who died were believed to have been on the plane, while those injured were inside the building. The National Transportation Safety Board said the pilot asked for an immediate return to the airport in Orange County shortly after takeoff, but he did not say why. The Fullerton City Council posted a statement on social media calling the crash a solemn tragedy. A deep winter chill is gripping the northern half of the country, and a major winter storm is set to sweep across the U.S. this weekend into early next week. NTD's Christina Corona reports on the areas that will be most affected.
A major winter storm is set to impact over 1,300 miles across the U.S., bringing a mix of snow, ice, rain, and severe thunderstorms. The storm is developing over the Central Plains and will persist through early next week. Before the major system arrives, light snow moved across parts of the Northeast on Friday afternoon. This system could bring 1 to 2 inches of snow from Maryland to southern New Jersey through Friday night. Light snow will also affect sections of the Interstate 95 corridor from Washington, D.C. to New York during the evening commute. The National Weather Service warned Thursday night on X that treacherous travel conditions are expected, with power outages likely in areas receiving more than a quarter inch of ice. Kansas City, Missouri is expected to experience dangerously slick travel Saturday evening. The storm is set to track along Interstate 70, bringing heavy snow and ice to the St. Louis area from Saturday night through Sunday. By Sunday, cities across the Ohio Valley and the Mid-Atlantic may face treacherous travel conditions as snow and ice spread eastward. In the south, thunderstorms with damaging winds and tornadoes could hit between Houston, Texas and Memphis, Tennessee on Sunday afternoon. By Sunday night, snow could reach Washington, D.C. Cities like Baltimore and Philadelphia could see snowfall totals of 6 inches or more. Once the storm passes, an Arctic blast of bitter cold will follow, with the polar vortex likely dropping temperatures 10 to 25 degrees below normal in the eastern U.S. by midweek. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Coming up, sirens echoed across Israel as another missile from Yemen was intercepted. Meanwhile, in Syria, former prisoners celebrated their release in Damascus. Jason Perry reports. And tensions flare in South Korea as presidential guards and the military block the arrest of impeached President Yoon. More on the 6-hour standoff after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Sirens sounded in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem again as the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen claimed responsibility for launching another missile at Israel. Meanwhile, in Syria, recently freed prisoners celebrated in the streets of Damascus. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
Another night of sirens sounding in Israel as seen in this video from Tel Aviv early Friday morning. Some residents looked through their windows hoping they wouldn't get hit by a missile. Israeli forces said a missile had been launched from Yemen and it was intercepted over Israeli territory, and the alarm sounded due to the possibility of falling debris. Later that day, the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen claimed responsibility for firing a missile at Israel, as thousands of Houthi supporters attended a rally in Sana'a, Yemen's capital. They also voiced their support for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, where Israel continues to wage war against Hamas terrorists. On Friday, Israel released video of terrorists reportedly planting explosives just yards away from Israeli troops. Israel also reported striking dozens of Hamas terror targets throughout the Gaza Strip, including approximately 40 Hamas gathering points, as well as command and control centers in the Gaza Strip. A resident whose neighborhood was hit shared his thoughts on the situation.
Amidst this rubble, amidst this tragedy in which we are living, amidst this pain and the bleeding wound, we hope that the free world, that the Arab and Islamic world will look at the Palestinian people and work for a ceasefire to stop this bleeding out of mercy for this afflicted people.
Meanwhile, in Syria, former prisoners who were released from the infamous Sednaya prison celebrated in the streets of Damascus on Friday. Thousands of prisoners in Syria were freed after the new Syrian forces, known as HTS, overthrew the Assad regime.
We came to thank them on behalf of every martyr who died with us, on behalf of every prisoner who was arrested with us, and on behalf of every person who suffered in these prisons, whether in Sednaya prison or the rest of the prisons.
Sednaya prison was also known as the slaughterhouse. Human rights groups have reported mass executions in Syria's prisons under the Assad regime. Jason Perry, NTD News.
South Korean authorities failed to carry out an arrest warrant for impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. For several hours, a dramatic standoff unfolded at Yoon's compound. Here's a closer look.
Investigators led by the CIO, or Corruption Investigation Office, for high-ranking officials confronted members of the Presidential Security Service and soldiers who were seconded to them. By 1:30 p.m., the CIO called off the effort to arrest Yoon as it was concerned about the safety of its personnel. In a statement, it said it was judged that it was virtually impossible to execute the arrest warrant due to the ongoing standoff, and the office deeply regretted Yoon's attitude of non-compliance. Local media say the chief and vice chief of the Presidential Security Service are under investigation for obstruction of justice. Yoon has been under investigation for insurrection over his declaration of martial law last month, which stunned South Korea, a U.S. ally, and one of the region's most vibrant democracies. The current arrest warrant is valid until January 6th and gives investigators only 48 hours to hold Yoon after he is arrested. They must then decide whether to request a detention warrant or release him. Yoon's lawyer in a statement on Friday said the execution of an invalid arrest warrant against Yoon is unlawful. He added they will take legal action without elaborating. It's the latest turn in a political crisis sparked when Yoon declared martial law on December 3rd, claiming he was rooting out anti-state forces among his political opponents. Within hours, he revoked the order after lawmakers voted against it. Separate from the criminal investigation, Yoon's impeachment case is currently before the Constitutional Court to decide whether to reinstate or permanently remove him.
Coming up, what does the latest terror attack in New Orleans tell us about the influence of ISIS in the U.S.? Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, joins us for a deep dive. And Trump says the UK is making a very big mistake. High taxes are prompting oil and gas firms to exit Britain's North Sea region, while the government seeks to expand reliance on renewable energy. That and more when we come back.
All right, I know what you're thinking. When it's 8 p.m. on a Friday, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be maybe hanging out with your friends, hanging out with your family, maybe reading a good book, maybe watching TV, well, it's that last one, because over at NTD, they just launched Primetime, a brand new program, and I'm the host. It's a phenomenal show with a plethora of guests discussing the most pressing topics happening in America. So tune in, 8 p.m. Friday night on NTD.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Republican Congressman Mike Johnson narrowly won re-election to the House Speakership on the first ballot. The tally was 218 to 215 after he flipped to hardline GOP holdouts. President Biden will visit New Orleans in the wake of the terror attack that killed 14 people. Meanwhile, in the Tesla Cybertruck explosion, a former girlfriend of the soldier said he appeared to experience symptoms of traumatic brain injury from his deployment in Afghanistan. President Biden blocked the nearly $15 billion proposed deal for Japan's Nippon Steel to buy U.S. steel, citing national security concerns. Both companies blasted the decision as a political move. A major winter storm will deliver heavy snow, hazardous ice, rain, and severe thunderstorms to millions of Americans over the weekend and into next week. Authorities warned of treacherous travel conditions, power outages, and widespread closures from the plains to the East Coast. What does this latest attack in New Orleans tell us about the influence of ISIS in the U.S.? How do Americans come in contact with ISIS propaganda, and what does it take for someone to be radicalized? Joining us now to discuss is Victoria Coates. She's the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, Vice President of the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy, and author of the book Battle for the Jewish State. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again. Now, the FBI and DHS have issued a joint intel bulletin to the nation's law enforcement agencies, warning about potential copycats of the New Orleans terror attack. They highlight that since 2014, ISIS has promoted the use of cars as a weapon of terror. What does this tell us about the influence of ISIS in the U.S.?
Well, good to be with you, and Happy New Year. I think that this tells us that ISIS is alive and well, and is not only in the Middle East, but is also here in the United States. And this really brought back to my mind kind of echoes of the Fort Hood terrorist attack from more than 10 years ago, where you had a member of the United States Army who had been radicalized online by al-Awlaki in that case, and decided to shoot up his army base in Texas. And that had, that was declared by then President Obama workplace violence. They tried not to see the hand of radical Islamic terrorism in that attack. And of course, that then led to ISIS, breaking out across the Middle East a couple of years later and establishing their caliphate, which President Trump had to put an end to in 2017. So I think this is, a big wake-up call about what's going on both in our military culture here in the United States, but also potentially pernicious influences that are now present in the United States.
On that last part, how does someone in the U.S. come across ISIS propaganda and ideology enough to be radicalized? Is that mostly through the internet, or where are they getting this?
I think it can both happen through the internet, but it can also happen through mosques. And in this case, that appears to have been the case for this man who had been born a Muslim, but who had kind of abandoned his Muslim faith until recently, when he became far more radicalized. So I think this is a warning. It can come online. Some of that can be tracked. Some of it obviously wasn't tracked in this case, but it can also happen in person.
Now, the FBI says that he posted 5 videos to his Facebook account aligning himself with ISIS just hours before the attack. That is a stance that completely took his friends and family by surprise, according to one of the suspect's brothers in a statement to the Associated Press. What does it take for someone to become, quote, radicalized?
It basically takes embracing a very extreme and ideological version of Islam. And this comes in a couple of different flavors, if you will. There's the radical Shiite version that's promoted by the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is the Sunni version with groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which seem to have inspired this attack. And then you kind of have hybrids, groups like Hamas, for example, which is a Sunni group inspired by the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, but who is very closely allied with Iran. So I think the key message here is that these groups hate democracies, they hate Western civilization. So, I mean, in a word, civilization of any sort. And so they're not that picky with whom they align. So it's a bad problem here now, and I think we've seen it particularly after the October 7th attacks on Israel, where we've seen a lot of these folks take to the streets in the United States to, declare their allegiance to Hamas. Those guys came out after the attack in New Orleans simply to celebrate the killing of Americans, and they didn't particularly care who did it. So that's something I think we in the United States really have to wake up to.
And zooming out, it's not just the use of cars as terror acts that have been inspired by ISIS. The largest one in the U.S. being the Pulse nightclub shooting, which claimed the lives of 49 people. A hatchet attack and a subway bombing in New York were also inspired by ISIS. What steps does the U.S. need to take to counter this?
Well, I would say first and foremost, we need to recognize that this problem is here. And I think perhaps, as well as Fort Hood, the Pulse nightclub is very similar to what happened on New Year's Day morning in New Orleans. It's an attack on a soft target that the ISIS attacker considers to be degenerate. And so I think seeing these venues rather not as just places to go have fun, but as potential targets for folks like this is really critically important, and they really need to step up their game. I think the reports that not all the protections that should have been in place for a venue like New Orleans on a night like New Year's Eve, that's really disappointing, because obviously they have the Super Bowl coming up. They had the Sugar Bowl yesterday. There's going to be Mardi Gras in a couple of weeks. That just makes this all the more attractive for copycats if the perception is out there that it's not well guarded. So we just need to get rid of the fantasy that this problem isn't here in the continental United States.
Expanding on that, with Americans on edge following this attack, there's also concerns over those on the FBI terror watch list illegally entering the U.S. What will need to happen next for the nation to heal and move forward together?
Well, that's the very important flip side to this coin. This person was an American citizen, a member of the United States Armed Forces, but at the same time, we know that over the last 4 years, we've had many thousands of folks who are on the terrorist watch list cross illegally into the United States. They haven't been tracked. And that's why what I think President-elect Donald Trump and my old colleague at Heritage, Tom Holman, are saying is so critically important, that we have to identify these people, figure out where they are, and get them out of our country, because that kind of trained militant coming in and having this kind of an ideology could be far more dangerous than what we saw in New Orleans.
Victoria Coates, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
President-elect Trump calling on Britain to change course, criticizing the UK's move away from oil and gas and toward wind energy. It comes following reports that firms are moving out of Britain's North Sea oil and gas basin due to high taxes. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has the story.
President-elect Donald Trump has called on Britain to open up the North Sea and get rid of windmills. The North Sea is one of the world's oldest offshore oil and gas basins. Trump made the remarks in a post on Truth Social on Friday, saying the UK is making a very big mistake. He linked to a report from last November, highlighting plans by Texas oil firm Apache to exit the North Sea by December 2029. The company also expects North Sea production to fall by 20% year-on-year in 2025. It comes after the British government last October said it would increase a windfall tax on oil and gas producers, raising the energy profits levy to 38%, which means oil and gas companies now face a 78% total tax rate. The British government wants to use the revenue to raise funds for renewable energy projects. North Sea producers have warned that the higher tax rate could lead to a sharp drop in investments. Some companies have sold assets, while others merged operations and sought to diversify to other regions. British Energy Secretary Ed Miliband has prioritised achieving clean energy by 2030. He has blocked new drilling licenses in the North Sea, while also seeking to increase wind and solar power production. But this focus is at odds with Trump's plans to expand US oil and gas production when he returns to the White House later this month. The North Sea has seen major wind farm development by Britain and European countries. But the rapidly growing offshore wind sector has had a tough few years. Costs ballooned due to technical and supply chain problems, as well as higher interest rates. Some developers have been considering their investments in offshore wind, or have assumed impairments due to the rising cost of building wind farms that can be more than 60 miles offshore. Ørsted, the world's biggest offshore wind farm developer, lowered its investment and capacity targets last year, and in December it emerged that British energy bill payers spent over $1.2 billion to pay wind farms to temporarily switch off. This is done during times of high winds to stop surges in power overwhelming the electricity grid. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
Coming up, what are your resolutions for the new year? Stephanie Cox went out to Times Square to hear people's answers. And the spectacle of Northern Lights is drawing more and more visitors to Finland. Thousands hope to see the beautiful aurora. That and more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. NTD's Stephanie Cox went out to Times Square recently to ask folks there about their highlights in 2024 and their resolutions for 2025. Check it out.
What's your New Year's resolutions for this year? Staying healthy and working out.
More yoga.
More yoga, less drinking.
My New Year's resolution, stay fit.
I did quit smoking cigarettes 22 years ago, but it wasn't a resolution. I just woke up on New Year's Day and I said, stuff it.
Exercising. It went pretty well. Yeah.
Any tips for how to keep New Year's resolutions?
Set it on your calendar. Definitely set a monthly reminder to keep in focus.
Change the scene a bit, make it look like a new chapter in your life, and it makes it easier to do whatever you want to do.
Highlights from this year?
Well, coming to New York, I'm thrilled to be here. Only a few weeks ago, I saw on Instagram the Backstreet Boys doing the opening of the Rockefeller, and I was sitting there watching that thinking, wow, I'd love to be there.
It was the best year, one of the best years, yeah. Yeah.
How come?
Because I came to New York, New Jersey.
What are you looking forward to in the year ahead?
Oh, looking forward to in the year ahead to make them more happy.
How would you describe the year that was 2024 for you?
Rough. Lost a lot of people, so it's just nice to, get here, start anew, so.
What are you looking forward to in the new year?
Starting my life with my new wife, which is my fiance. We got our wedding coming up, so yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Any New Year's resolutions yet?
Stop bull riding. Yeah, I retired this year, so I gotta stay retired.
And how would you describe the year that was 2024 for you?
Oh man, busy.
What are you looking forward to in the year ahead?
Oh, I'm looking forward to my kids turning 18, watching them grow up. I got triplets, so it's a big year for our household.
Yeah. And any advice for people out there as they head towards the new year?
Man, it's just another day, everyone. But do what you want, whatever you want to do by the end of the year, do it now. I would say that.
Tourists are heading to the Lapland region in northern Finland in hopes of seeing the famous Northern Lights. Thousands make the journey each winter to witness this spectacular phenomenon.
So we are going to the north side of Rovaniemi, about half an hour drive to a very private place where there are no lights, no street lights, nothing. It's totally dark.
Photographer and tour guide Juna Forsgren is leading a group of tourists to a frozen lakeside spot in the Finnish Lapland. And they're in luck. A wave of green-colored northern lights dances across the star-studded night sky. Forsgren started taking tourists northern lights hunting about 5 years ago. Back then, he was just one of a few.
It's been growing a lot. When I started it 5 years ago, it was relatively calm and small groups only, and there were not so many tour operators as it is now. So now there are tons of different tour operators in the city, and also the tourism numbers have been growing like every year.
Finland sits on the southern rim of the Northern Lights auroral oval. But during geomagnetic storms, that oval expands southward, making auroras visible in central and southern parts of the Nordic nation.
We are quite far north here in Finland, so the northern lights are more common in these high latitude regions, and especially in the Lapland region here in Finland, we get the northern lights almost every night.
This family took 3 flights from their hometown in Mumbai, India, in the hope of glimpsing the aurora.
It's stunning. I mean, it's something you have to see in your life. It's beautiful. You don't want to leave. You want to just see more and more.
The city of Rovaniemi saw a record 1.2 million overnight visitors last year, an increase of almost 30%. For those who are perhaps a little impatient or can't stand the cold, Rovaniemi resident Reijo Kortesalmi created Aurora Alert. It's a real-time alert system that triggers once auroras are spotted in the night sky.
I have my own cameras, and they send images to my server, and my software analyzes is there auroras or not. And if there is auroras, customer gets alerts to their mobile phone.
Kortesalmi says 3 large Rovaniemi tour companies use his technology. But during solar maximum, visitors could also look out of the window and check. He says if the sky is clear, there are some sort of auroras every night.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.